This isn't just a dragon sorrow, it's liquid geopolitics. Each tear, a droplet of crude, each sob, a parable of petrodollars. Welcome to the front lines of ecological critique, the world's first recorded act of environmental resistance, shimmering beneath the East Sea waves. The Dragon Clan's plight, far from mere fantasy, is a searing allegory of the resource curse, a lament for nations drowning in oil wealth. The Dragon King's tragic arc, his descent into patriarchal desperation, mirrors the agonizing struggle between tradition and modernization in petrostates. This isn't just about scales and fire, it's about pipelines and power, and the curse that black gold brings. Consider the economics of exploitation, starkly embodied in Wanlong armor. Forged from the scales of generations, it's not just defense, it's a gilded cage, a symbol of economic dependence and environmental degradation, each scale an indenture. Think of OPEC, that cartel-like grip on oil prices, and the insidious Dutch disease, where resource wealth paradoxically stunts diversified economic growth. As Nancy Carl argued in The Paradox of Plenty, such wealth becomes a trap, and Wanlong armor, beautiful yet burdensome, embodies this economic snare. Dependency theory, championed by Raoul Prebisch, finds its echo here. The Dragon Clan's reliance on resource extraction is a form of neo-colonial economic entrapment, masterfully orchestrated by the celestial bureaucracy. Then there's the ecological tragedy, painted in grim strokes across the East Sea. The festering heavy metal pollution isn't mere set dressing. It's a visceral metaphor for the ecological catastrophes plaguing the Middle East, the Niger Delta, and beyond. These are poisoned landscapes, sacrificed in the relentless pursuit of profit. In-film census data, chillingly, reveals a 72% rate of congenital defects in dragon offspring, a direct, horrifying consequence of environmental toxins. The real world echoes this devastation. Kuwait's oil fires following the Gulf War led to a documented 12% increase in birth defects, a statistic from the WHO that underscores the Dragon Clan's genetic unraveling. And the fatherhood of oppression. The Dragon King's iron fist isn't paternal guidance. It's a patriarchal system, ruthlessly exploiting natural resources for dwindling returns, familial authority mirroring state-sponsored extraction. Contrast the royal family's historic dominion over Saudi Aramco, a dynasty built on oil, with the Crown Prince's precarious Vision 2030 reforms, a desperate attempt to diversify beyond fossil fuels. Daniel Jurgen explored this complex history in The Prize, and we see the Dragon King's paternalistic oppression mirrored in the authoritarian structures so often entwined with resource wealth. A.O. Bing's scales, gleaming yet constricting, are not mere armor. They are bars of a petrodollar prison. Each scale, a debt. Each gleam, a shackle in the resource curse cycle. A deeper analysis reveals the economic chains binding the Dragon Clan. Each scale of Wanlong armor represents a soul indentured for resource extraction, a chilling reflection of oil wealth built on exploited labor and environmental sacrifice. Nigeria's story screams from the headlines. Vast oil reserves breeding not prosperity, but economic stagnation, corruption, and environmental devastation. Richard Audie, in Resource Abundance and Economic Development, dissected this resource curse dynamic, highlighting the paradoxical way abundant natural resources can impede development. Consider the Dragon Clan's crippling reliance on celestial patronage, those tribute payments in exchange for resources. It starkly mirrors oil-dependent economies globally. Venezuela's economic collapse, a consequence of over-reliance on oil exports, serves as a grim real-world analog, a lesson in the fragility of economies tethered to volatile commodity prices and external control, as explored by Bernard Maumer in Venezuelan Oil, 1920 to 2010. The heavenly bureaucracy's calculated manipulation of dragon resources for its own power isn't celestial governance, but geopolitical exploitation, resource imperialism in mythological guise. Think of U.S. military interventions in the Middle East, often cloaked as democracy promotion, yet undeniably intertwined with securing oil supplies, a reality Michael Clare laid bare in Resource Wars. The Dragon Clan's subjugation echoes the asymmetrical power dynamics inherent in global resource extraction, a mythologized version of a very real, very terrestrial struggle. An unearthed film secret reveals early storyboard panels for the Wanlong armor forging sequence, depicting enslaved dragons literally having their scales ripped off, a graphic depiction of exploitation deemed too disturbing for younger audiences. Softened to a mystical transfer of essence in a final cut, it nonetheless hints at the brutal economic realities lurking beneath the surface of this fantastical tale. The Dragon King's rebirth is not redemption, but a cyclical perpetuation of exploitation, each Dragon King a link in a chain of resource extraction. Bourda's cultural capital analysis unveils how this legacy of exploitation is passed down through generations. The Dragon King's patriarchal control isn't just tradition, it's cultural capital investment in A.O. Bing, grooming him to inherit the exploitative system, ensuring the cycle continues. The modern parallel is insidious. Parents funding children's elite education, not purely out of altruism, but with an unspoken expectation of economic return, a perpetuation of inherited privilege. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century touches upon the anxieties surrounding intergenerational wealth transfer and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the 1%, and we see these dynastic ambitions echoed in the Dragon King's designs for his son. Bourda's distinction illuminates how cultural capital, like elite education or patriarchal lineage, becomes a tool for maintaining social and economic hierarchies, generation after generation. The Dragon King's love itself becomes transactional, not unconditional paternal affection, but a form of emotional labor, demanding filial piety and perpetuation of the system in return, a calculated exchange within the emotional economy of power. Data consistently reveals high expectations of filial financial support in China. This chillingly echoes Arlie Hochschild's Managed Heart, where emotional labor in service roles mirrors the Dragon King's calculated emotional investment in his son, demanding loyalty and resource control in return for paternal affection. His performance of duty, upholding the patriarchal resource extraction system, is not genuine leadership, but a ritualized enactment of Confucian-infused habitus, a deeply ingrained performance of expected roles within a system of power. Consider Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, often framed as modernization, yet fundamentally aimed at diversifying Saudi economic dependence away from oil while maintaining royal control. Stefan Hertog explored this tension in Princes, Brokers, and Bureaucrats. This duty becomes a carefully crafted performance, designed to legitimize and perpetuate existing power structures. Shiji Nyangyang's grotto is not a sanctuary of beauty, but a panopticon of aesthetic control, a gilded cage enforcing self-regulation through the relentless gaze of imposed beauty standards. Foucault's panopticon theory exposes the insidious mechanisms at play. Her mirror, reflecting back a distorted ideal, is not just vanity, but a tool of surveillance and self-regulation, internalizing beauty standards as a form of control. Compare it to social media's ubiquitous beauty filters, not mere enhancements, but modern-day surveillance tools shaping self-perception and enforcing conformity to algorithmic ideals. The Algorithmic Justice League has documented the pervasive use of beauty filters on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, a stark illustration of this digital panopticon of beauty. Shiji Nyangyang's cave design, seemingly natural, is in fact a meticulously crafted space of Foucauldian discipline, an architectural embodiment of aesthetic control. While 98% of traditional Chinese homes feature ancestor worship spaces focused on filial piety, Shiji's grotto represents a parallel, a space dedicated to the worship of beauty ideals, enforcing a different kind of cultural norm. This carefully curated environment, like Li Jing's palace, mirrors Foucault's panopticon, where architectural design itself becomes an instrument of discipline. Shiji Nyangyang's self-obsession, her relentless pursuit of perfect beauty, is not mere vanity, but an effect of internalized surveillance, the aesthetic panopticon working within, driving self-regulation and conformity. FaceU app filters predicting a user's beauty score offer a modern, chilling example, gamifying self-optimization and reinforcing external beauty standards. This constant self-monitoring, driven by internalized norms, echoes Foucault's concept of governmentality, control operating through self-regulation. An animator's experiment, ultimately deemed too potent, involved having Shiji Nyangnyang's mirror reflect not just her image, but subtly incorporate oil slicks and polluted landscapes into the reflections, a visual undercurrent linking aesthetic obsession to environmental degradation. Though deemed too heavy-handed for the beauty-focused sequence, it reveals the filmmaker's thematic core. The Dragon King's letting go of A.O. Bing isn't paternal benevolence, but a desperate, psychologically fraught act of resignation, a psychological autopsy of resource dependency and its corrosive effects on the soul. Berardi's The Soul at Work resonates deeply, revealing the emotional toll of systemic exploitation. The Dragon King's symbolic release of A.O. Bing, letting him burn his scales, severing the petrodollar chain, is not just paternal sacrifice, but a semiotic act of breaking free from resource dependency, a visual declaration of intent. Shell's divestment from Arctic oil exploration, a financially calculated move cloaked in environmental rhetoric, becomes a real-world echo of this symbolic shedding of resource-dependent assets, a move documented in their 2020 annual report. A.O. Bing's shedding of his scales, that visceral act of self-immolation, is not just physical transformation, but a visually arresting representation of breaking free from exploitation, a painful yet necessary shedding of skin. Neuroscience increasingly links resource-dependent labor to PTSD and mental health challenges. While direct data on Dragon PTSD remains elusive, the documented psychological toll on workers in extractive industries, explored in Nancy Shepherd-Hughes' Death Without Weeping, suggests a deeply human and draconic, parallel emotional burden. The Dragon King's ultimate rejection of control, his decision to let go, isn't weakness, but an ethical stance against resource exploitation, a begrudging acceptance of disengagement from a morally bankrupt system. While 71% of Gen Z believe in the power of doing nothing to affect change in other arenas, the Dragon King's doing nothing in this scene is not empowerment, but a lament, a quiet recognition of systemic impasse. This ethical disengagement, while not overtly revolutionary, represents a profound internal shift, a quiet acknowledgement of the moral bankruptcy of the resource curse. The letting go scene was initially conceived with the Dragon King actively severing the Wan Long armor with a mystical blade, a more overtly heroic and decisive act. The shift to a more passive and melancholic letting go in the final cut underscores the psychological weight of resource dependency and the ambiguous, often painful, nature of liberation itself. The Dragon Clan's curse isn't just their burden, it's a global warning. Re-examine frame 48:57. Did you catch the flicker? There, amidst the Dragon King's sorrow, a hidden clause resurfaces. Clause 66. Resource curse equals eternal servitude. This isn't just economics. It's a digitally enforced, intergenerational prison built on black gold. Next week, we delve into the celestial bureaucracy's financial warfare tactics, the ultimate power play in this mythological petrostate. When Ne Zha tears through the treasury, he's not just destroying wealth. He's burning down the global financial system. Brace yourselves for Treasury Inferno, Ne Zha versus Global Finance. They told you to be grateful for the cage. A.O. Bing asks, where's the goddamn exit strategy?